All right, everyone. I am here for a round two with Carter McFarland down in the Kidder, Portland office. You all probably saw our conversation from a few months ago. We talked heavily about the Portland office market and kind of what's going on the macro economic level, especially as it relates to our local real estate markets. And when you look at Seattle and Portland together, we have a lot of overlap, both in office and industrial sectors that Carter and I both cover. So thought it'd be good for another recap and update. And so I'll let you start, Carter. What's kind of going on in your world, maybe beyond just office, kind of big picture Portland market. What's it like down there?
Yeah, big picture, I think there's a lot of questions on what are Nike and Intel doing. Obviously, I think everybody's seen the news of Nike's laying off some folks from the corporate office. Intel has announced $36 billion, and those are kind of two major drivers in the suburban market. A lot of the tenants are servicing Nike and Intel. And then downtown, there's been a lot of tax incentives announced. Again, return to office for major companies. You're seeing more activity in downtown Tuesday through Thursday. We see the office, coming back a little bit, but there's a lot of questions surrounding, hey, should I be hybrid? What days should I come to the office? What should my office look like? I would say a lot more flight to quality continues to be the talk. A lot of people want safety, security, free parking are kind of the three things that we talk a lot about with our groups right now, especially downtown. Downtown's a lot cleaner. We see a lot more engagement from local politicians on issues of homelessness and crime as well, and safety
Good.
and security. And I think that, everybody's kind of wrapping up their sleeves and really working really hard to kind of return downtown Portland.
Good. That's awesome. I mean, we remember, I don't want to, maybe I'm bashing it by saying the heydays of Portland, but
Yeah.
obviously that city was thriving for a long
Yeah.
time. And then like most, it got crushed in the pandemic and then it
Yeah.
never really recovered and on the contrary got worse. And obviously a lot of that's political. We don't have to go too deep on that, but
Yeah.
now it's for me, it's refreshing to hear that the politicians and kind of local business owner, everybody in the community is waking up and going, hey, we got to fix this if we want to get back to those heydays. Seattle is interesting. It's similar in a lot of regards. If you look at it high level, I mean, what's interesting, we all know this because we read it in the news every day, like hospitality, travel, entertainment spending is still holding and up. People are still out there spending money, which is very interesting given when you dive in the data and kind of see
Especially
that.
with the economy where it is.
Exactly, right. And credit levels are increasing, debt defaults are increasing. It's the economy's saying one thing and then people are doing another, which is really weird. But that aside, multifamily here is doing okay, industrial is doing okay, office is still way down. But showing at least a couple positive signs. Retail is actually doing really well too, kind of similar to what I was saying with the experiential kind of spending and activity we've seen. The industrial one is really interesting because I went back and watched our conversation from before.
Yeah.
And
I was
so
going
if
to
you
ask you
look,
about if your predictions were all right.
well, I won't comment on that because I didn't. Maybe I'll just say I didn't write them down. But but what's so interesting historically, like trend wise, we get quiet during the holidays. Everyone kind of checks out, takes a break, and then you expect come like first quarter that
Yeah.
everything picks right back up. We haven't picked up, and we're still sitting here in the second quarter, which admittedly didn't really fully see coming. I didn't expect 24 to be a banner year by any means, but what's really changed is, especially if you look at just the pure statistics, our vacancy rate has climbed up pretty dramatically, both on paper and you can just feel it. There's been a ton, and this is specific to industrial properties, ton of sublease space on the market, ton, way more than we've seen historically. And then in addition to the sublease space, we're seeing an increase in just traditional space giving back from tenants. Tenants are really focused on being efficient with their
Hmm.
costs and how they're using their space. So, I mean, my general thought is like the tenant that used to be out looking for 100,000 feet is now looking for 50. And that seems to be pretty common across the board, which then inherently leads to space coming back, right? If tenants are theoretically downsizing, landlords are really focused on trying to hold rental rates, and you can understand why based on a cap rate environment and investment value. Your higher rent, your higher NOI, your building's worth more.
Yeah.
But what they're doing to hold face rates is they are giving massive concessions. I'm working on a deal that will get completed this week that will have over a year of free rent,
Wow.
a really hefty moving allowance, big concession, the largest amount of concessions I've ever seen in my career, and it's good space, good tenant, good landlord, and the rate, but we're holding face rate for that landlord. They bought the building, they bought it arguably at peak of market. They need to hold rates in order to hold building values. So I totally understand both sides of it. And from their perspective, it actually, in my opinion, makes a lot of sense for them to give these concessions to hold that, hold the building value.
Mhm.
But you look at it just from a pure market comp and tenant standpoint, you're like, wow, that many concessions. I mean, it's just, it's new, right? And in this deal, we're not seeing 10, 20, 30 of these out there, but we're hearing about it, and it's all kind of in the works as all these landlords are realizing, let's focus on stability, let's get tenants in these buildings. I'd rather get, if I got to give this tenant a year of free rent and my alternative is I sit on the vacancy for a year, well, it's the same thing, right? Might as well get them in there. And frankly, it's better because then they're paying expenses and they're ingrained in the space. Um, so it's just been really, it's been such a shift. And so I kind of commonly called 23 the great reset. I think 24 is kind of the great pause, right? And
Yep.
you're seeing the same thing in your world. Everyone's talking about it. We're going into summer. Summer can be a little slow. We're
Yep.
going into an election year. No one wants to make a big decision, as you know, there's a big presidential election, right? And then you have all this kind of uncertainty in the greater economy and then the industrial market specifically. I just feel like everyone's going to be kicking the can down the road for the rest of the year. There's always going to be the people that have to make the decisions, but generally speaking, it seems like we're going to just kind of be pausing for a little bit.
Yeah, it seems like in talking to the industrial folks here, the Portland office, it definitely seems like there were some trends there of vacancies climbing up a little bit. We're kind of sitting around that 4%. Spaces are sitting on market. They're not flying, in 30 days like they used to. It's taken, 6 to 8 months to backfill some tenant spaces. But I'm just frankly shocked that year free rent, it's like you're doing an office deal in downtown Portland. I mean, I in my career have never heard that. So I think that's awesome that you were able to get that for your client.
Yeah, no, thanks. It's and it really, both sides feel really good about the deal, which is the best part, right? But to your point, it's been very contrary to, I mean, I remember, pick your date 3 years ago, we'd go find an available, our vacancy rate was at 3%.
Mhm.
We'd have a hell of a time finding a space for a tenant. We found it. They'd be one of three or four. Landlord would say, this is the rate, no free rent, no concessions. You start tomorrow, 5-year lease. Do you want it? Right. And at that point, you're still competing. Now it's completely flipped. And so, like, case in point, you mentioned Portland being at 4%. We're like at 8%. So
Oh, wow.
we went from like 3 to 8. And it's a lot of that is being driven up by the subleases that I mentioned. And then we still have a pretty robust development pipeline. So there's still new buildings coming out of the ground and getting delivered this year and going into next year as well, which if you go back and look at some of my other content and videos, I've been talking about this for a while, is that we're typically a 2 or 3 year lag from land getting entitled to actually coming out of the ground and being ready for occupancy. So everything we're delivering now started in 2021, and then even the beginning of 22, the market was still moving, right? So we'll see deliveries going into next year. And when you've got new deliveries, sublease space, vacancy ticking up, tenants a little bit hesitant to make moves, we're going to see this spike in vacancy. We're going to see a spike in available spaces and choices. But then, assuming the economy improves, I'm still subscribing to this general thesis, is that then that space will get reabsorbed. There's nothing to backfill it. Vacancy will start to drop. Sublease spaces will start to drop off the market, and then we're going to be sitting at a low vacancy again, which then, you just read the tea leaves, then rents are going to go back up. So we'll see how long it takes. I mean, we're going to be a couple years in this kind of period, I think, that we're in right now.
If you're a kind of a tenant in this market, um, up in Washington, is there a flight to quality? Do you see tenants wanting to go to some of this more new construction property to capture some of these concessions? Or are you seeing a lot of rollover and renews, or hey, preference to keep costs low and go into like a sublease? What are you seeing the most of?
Yeah, great question. A little bit of both. I'd say generally we're seeing more flight to quality, and even in an instance where new construction, right, underwritten in 21 at 21 expected cap rates and pricing and all that. So they got to hold rates, kind of like that deal I was just talking about. Case in point, they're willing to give more concessions. But I think the tenants for a really high quality functional space, they're still willing to pay whatever it is, 10, 20, 30% more than the really down and dirty Class B, Class C space. There'll always be the tenants for that Class B, Class C space who have a really, yeah, pick whatever their business is, but thin margins, right? Where they can't afford the big rent bill because the rent is a much larger factor of their overall revenue and expense and all that. Whereas if you're still a tenant whose, total real estate cost is under 8% of your total costs for running your business, then you'd probably be willing to pay a little bit more for that Class A space because it functions a lot better. It's in the location you want. Your employees like going to it. Pick your reason why, but that's the flight to quality is definitely still happening. Here's what's interesting though, is a lot of these sublease spaces that we are seeing come on are still Class A spaces. They're Class A
Huh.
spaces that tenants signed leases for back in 2021, maybe even 19, pick your date, where they anticipated growth, especially coming out of the pandemic. People saw their businesses growing and exploding. They're like, wow, we need more space. We're anticipating, we're up year over year 100% or 150%. We need more space. Then fast forward today, they absorbed that space, plan to grow into it for the next 5 to 10 years. And then their business has kind of more or less come to a halt. And they're going, holy cow, I'm paying for twice as much space as I need. They leased the quality space because that's what they wanted. If they leased it a few years ago, rents still went up, so they're under market. And so there's Class A under market available space out there that competes directly with the new construction space, but at rates that are 20, 30% less. Meanwhile, the term is pretty flexible, which a lot of people are valuing flexibility right now because there's kind of just a general feeling of uncertainty. So, owners of that new Class A product that's getting these new warehouse spaces are getting delivered are nervous because I mean there's just a lot of competition and Class A space, sublease space, Class B, Class C, every size range too. And I'm not saying it's a total, bloodbath out there.
Mhm.
8% vacancy, frankly, is still arguably pretty healthy. Um, but tenants, the momentum's shifted. It's definitely in the tenants' favor, if you ask me.
I mean, a lot of my viewers and a lot of the people that watch the content that I put out, they're more from the office side. And I think I was on a call earlier this week, and I had a group that's primarily all office was asking, what's going on in Washington, what's going on in California, what industries are busy. From the industrial side, where are you seeing where is the leasing coming from? What kind of industries are those? Is it people that are just local companies that are naturally growing and expanding? Is it people coming out of market? In the market, what do you see the most of? I know you said activity was slow, but I mean, you're signing a deal this week. What do you really see in kind of the trends for this year so far?
Yeah, it's been a very mixed bag. Like as you're asking that question, I'm thinking in my head, like, okay, what are the top three industries? And I don't even know if I could truly name them.
Yeah.
Um, I think high tech and advanced tech is kind of starting. Seattle, Portland, the Northwest, even California for that matter, have always been a hub for that kind of type of tenant and that kind of type of business, right? And that type of business usually occupies traditional industrial space or more like a flex industrial office space. And I think we're still seeing a lot of that. I mean, you could use the classic AI buzzword, but generally speaking, that kind of space is definitely still in demand. I'm seeing a lot of service businesses that seem to be still doing well and looking for space. Think like your HVAC companies, your plumbing companies, and even on a much higher level, like equipment service and sales, things like that. Groups that need large swaths of industrial space and large, areas for parking employees and fleet vehicles and the office that comes along with the warehouse. They need the industrial component, but then they also need that office and parking and space component. I think that's a big one. Aerospace has always been a mainstay of Seattle, and it's been
Small
all
company
over
up
the.
there called Boeing.
Yeah, and I mean Boeing's been getting kicked in the teeth left and right
Yeah.
lately. So they're not exactly out there. I mean they took down a lot of space at the end of 23,
Hmm.
but aerospace in general, if Boeing's getting kicked in the teeth, then typically their subcontractors are too.
Hmm.
Although they're everyone, I mean it's public data. I mean their backlog of orders and deliveries that they need to make is still significant. So even if you're reading all the doom and gloom for them in the news, they're still super busy. They still are producing. They still need space. Their subs are busy. So aerospace is still doing what aerospace does. I mean, a lot of those tenants are so sticky because their build outs are so um, intensive. So you don't really see them, quote unquote, out in the market, usually looking for new space. They kind of
Mhm.
continue to figure out how to make their existing space work. But that's been the gist. I mean, the biggest drop off for us has been 3PLs, third party logistics, trucking companies, transload, all those groups. We've seen that, and they've always been a huge mainstay of our market from the tenant standpoint, and they are definitely they're absorbing less space, and they're probably the number one group that's putting sublease space on the market because again, they were absorbing all these contracts, absorbing all these spaces. We were all ordering a ton of stuff online, and now as the consumer is becoming a little bit more sensitive to what's going on in the economy, you're thinking, I wanted to order that off of Amazon today. Maybe I should hold off for a minute and save my money, right?
Mhm.
And that trend has been going on for a while now, which then Amazon goes to their 3PL because Amazon does a lot of internal logistics, but people don't realize that they also do outsource a lot of their logistics to third parties. So the third party group that maybe had the Amazon contract, just using it for example, well, Amazon contacted them and said, "Hey, we don't need your space anymore. We don't, we're not gonna renew our contract." That group had leased 150,000 feet dedicated to Amazon. Amazon's gone, which isn't unheard of for these companies that contracts come and go. Now they're going out and shopping for their next contract. Guess what? There aren't a lot of groups that also need space. And so then they're kind of in a mode of they either need to shed space or they're not actively looking for more. So we'll see if it continues. I mean, everything is trending in any direction on any given day, right?
Mhm.
But it's been interesting to say the least. It's just different. It's a different market.
Yeah, I'm sitting here and I asked that question about what are the busiest industries, and I'm trying to think of the same thing. And downtown Portland, like what are those folks going out and leasing space? And I think it's a mixed bag too. You're seeing a lot of nonprofits,
Hmm.
just because rates are dropping much lower. They're going up to this flight to quality. They're going from a Class B building to a Class A. We're seeing a lot of movement in the legal space, legal services, and then out in the suburbs. You said it. You hit the nail right on the head. Of the West Coast has always been a high tech hub. A lot of folks going out and moving their headquarters or opening more space just as Intel starts to scale. We're not really sure exactly everything that Intel is going to be doing here in Portland, but you're definitely starting to see folks doing smaller office expansions. Hey, going and leasing more lab space, different things like that. But it's truly a mixed bag. We're still seeing some flight from downtown to Cruiseway, which is our kind of boardwalk asset. You're seeing suburban rates for the first time being higher than downtown. Rates are high as $45 per square foot in Class A office on Cruiseway. And I mean, our highest downtown rate right now in new constructions, like, probably all in $50, maybe $52 full service in a, brand new construction property. Um, so, your average downtown rate right now is, low 30s with 30+% vacancy. Collier's put out an article, was that 2, 3 weeks ago, saying that Portland has the highest office vacancy of any major city in the country.
Hmm.
So it's kind of, there is some, I think there's a lot of doom and gloom. Like a lot of our clients are reading, articles all across the country about whether it's office or industrial and the real estate market as a whole and what's going on. I still think that there is a lot of activity. I think in a down market, there are a lot of opportunities. And I think that what I'm talking about, a lot of my clients is being really strategic and, going out and trying to test the market and going and doing early renewals, blend extends, different things like that to help leverage some of these concessions that are being given out in this market.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. The key here is when you're in a different market, you got to behave differently, right? And I think we
Yeah.
talked about this last time. Before, we didn't have a whole lot of time to even really think very strategically on our decisions because the market was just moving so fast and it was so competitive. Now we actually have time, right? Which frankly for us as brokers is probably the best thing because we typically thrive on being able to strategize with our clients, give them good advice, show them all their alternatives, right? And when we were forced to compete and move at this pace that we were previously, and our clients required it, so we had to do it, right, to be able to win them the deals we needed to. We couldn't really leverage our full skill set because we just didn't
Yeah.
really have that chance, right? Now we really do. And I think the tenants of the world, the owners of the world, they're going to continue to really appreciate the brokerage groups that put in the time, the effort, the analysis, right, to really weigh all the options and what are my opportunities here. And frankly, it's going to probably not only reset the market a little bit to a level that it needs to be to kind of consistently continue moving, but I think in the future, I mean, it's now. I mean, it's no different than the past, right? I mean, we all go through real estate goes through cycles, and this is just, kind of call it the bottom end
Yeah.
of the current cycle that we're in. Seemingly, it's only a matter of time before it picks back up again. It's just, when, how quickly does it move, and then who's in the best position to take advantage of it when it comes. But it's a good opportunity right now. To your point, I mean, there are a lot of opportunities right there. If whether you're a tenant or an owner, if you need to make a move right now.
Do you think 2024 is the bottom? If you're talking to a client today that's looking to go at least 30,000 feet of industrial space, what are you kind of telling them?
Yeah, I think 24, if it's not the bottom, it's probably very close. 25 being, my opinion is, we've been talking about the rate cuts that everyone's been holding out for, right? And it's already become clear that if rate cuts even happen this year, they're much less than what were projected at the end of last year. So end of last year, the end of 23, everyone's sentiment was, hey, they're right around the corner. Everything is going to be, rosy again. 24 is going to be the turnaround year. And I'm looking at it, I'm going, there's no way that 20. First of all, there's just such a lag effect in commercial real estate compared to even what's going on in the greater economy. So even if some rate cuts come at the end of this year, that's great. It's going to take time for that to stick in commercial real estate. And we're already almost, I mean, hell, we're almost halfway through the year, right? So we see some rate cuts maybe at the end of this year. The election gets done, which everyone's holding their breath for anyway. I'm inclined to believe that 25 starts out on a really good foot, as far as expectations, what everyone's projecting, hopefully seeing increases in business activity, right? But that's going to take, I mean, that's going to take a lot of time for that to actually swing back up. So if 24 is still arguably trending down, and then we bottom here at the end of 24 and 25 kind of sits there, and then we pick back up. I mean, it's kind of my current projection. But you'd probably agree with me, this like bottom isn't even really, I mean, it's not a pit, right? I mean, feels a little bit more like a flattening than anything, and like kind of a flattening with a slight dip. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, I think when you look at this on a 20, 30-year horizon, this is going to be a bigger blip, but it's not the end of the world. And I think that there's a lot of negativity out there in the real estate market and bad press on, real estate assets selling for, 50, 60, 70% less than they were bought for several years ago. I think that it's a cycle. We'll get through it. And I think that with a lot of Fortune 500 companies and regional companies forcing employees to come back to office, I think that this is going to jumpstart the economy as well. As I think that if you talk to a lot of these major players, they feel that innovation's down. You read any articles from tech companies, they feel that this work from home has stagnated their innovation and development. And I think that you're going to see, people returning to office and, really grinding it. I'm excited. I think that 25 will be a much better year, and I'm in 100% agreement with you. Again, I think a lot of our clients, whether you're an office tenant or industrial tenant, I think everybody's starved for information. I had a large institutional owner in from out of town, and I was sitting there kind of asking him, hey, what have you seen across the country? And I think everybody is in that holding pattern right now of,
Yeah.
We don't know. We're putting our best foot forward, but we really won't know, I think, until early next year.
There seems to be, to your point there, a significant amount of consistency across the entire country right now with kind of the general behavior, feelings, projections, what's actually happening at the ground level. You look historically like West Coast markets, the Northwest, California, the East Coast, New York, New Jersey, some of the ports that have been growing in the South, like Houston and Charleston, Savannah, like those areas on the industrial side have been really huge drivers of the greater national industrial market. And meanwhile, I think all those markets are arguably sitting in the same spot as all of your interior markets. Everyone's kind of in this same boat when I talk with everybody across the country. So to your point, It's interesting. It seems the first time I can remember in recent memory that everyone's kind of living this life in this world that we're in right now. And then it's just, how does it continue to evolve? How long does it last? When does it change? It's always changing, but when are we going to see a drastic shift? And I'm kind of thinking that comes in 25, if you were to ask me at the moment.
If you were a industrial tenant with a lease coming up in the next 18 months, what are kind of one, two, three points of advice that you would discuss with them, or pieces of advice, excuse me?
I'd say definitely figure out, do you need to make a shorter or a long-term decision? In other words, are we talking 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years based on your business projections, right? It's a good time, in my opinion, to make a long-term decision if you can afford to do so, if you think the space is going to work for you, because I think you're going to get the best rental rates and concessions that we've seen arguably in recent years. So I think that's critical, is figuring out what does your future look like, and then consequently, part of that future is, where do you want to be geographically? Where do your employees live? All the traditional factors that go into making a space decision. And then I think it's being very diligent. You mentioned like early renewals, looking at all your options, going out there, touring space again, having ongoing conversations with your existing landlord if staying in place is a potential option. Um, Landlords want to talk right now. They want to negotiate. They want to know what's going on in the market too. They get that tenants have options. So again, I think it's really being diligent and taking your time to look and weigh all your options, which is, I mean, that's our job. That's what I do. So that's currently what I'm advising all of my tenants to, is get ahead of this. And even if we're not ready to necessarily go out and look at space, let's sit down and plan what the next 12 to 18 months look like. Because when things do change, and they will, it's going to be interesting. You don't know at that point if you're going to have to move 1,000,000 miles an hour again. Maybe your business explodes overnight. I mean, it's all unpredictable, but to the degree that you can get ahead of it, plan early. It always
Yeah.
works.
No, I think that's great advice for my clients as well.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, maybe in the interest of time, we'll wrap this up. I mean, any last thoughts on Portland, the West Coast? I mean, what do you think your next quarter looks like? What are you going to be trying to focus most of your time on?
I think, again, I'm a primarily tenant rep broker, so going out, talking to people as much as I possibly can be, really getting out front. I think historically, in office, you could start, 6 months to a year out. But I think you really need to be starting 2 years, if not more, out, and really sitting down, and you hit the nail on that perfectly, of just really being strategic. There's once in a lifetime concessions right now, especially in office and downtown. And if you're able to go to a landlord with even 2-3 years left on your lease and go do an early extension or downsize, I think that's a great opportunity. So I think most of my efforts are going to be going and putting strategic plans together with tenants, and then as well just going out and talking to some different landlords and trying to be strategic as possible and give them the best advice of, here's the tenants in the market, here's kind of what we can do to make our space more attractive, and again, just doing different stuff that other people aren't doing.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. All right.
Yeah.
Well, appreciate your time, Carter. Always a
Yeah.
pleasure.
Nice to talk to you again.
Yeah. Until next time.
Oh, yeah.